Hello and welcome everyone. Today I would like to discuss a chapter from the book Universe of the Mind, a semiotic theory of culture by Yuri Lotman. The title of the chapter is Three Functions of a Text. This book was originally written in Russian and then it was later translated into English. So let us begin by knowing about the author Yuri Lotman. Yuri Lotman was a prominent Russian Estonian literary scholar, semiotician, and historian of Russian culture who worked at the University of Tartu. He was a founder of the Tartu Moscow Semiotic School. And the present book from which the chapter is being discussed is one of the key works on his ideas of science, semiotics, and culture. So, what is the chapter about? The central argument of the chapter is that semiotic systems, particularly language and the text, they produce have functions that extend far beyond the adequate transmission of a pre existing message. The text identifies and elaborates on two additional crucial functions. First, the generation of new meanings, identified as the creative function, and the second, the condensation of cultural memory. So, the chapter starts its discussion with the Saussurean model, and author also talks about what are the limitations of Saussurean model of communication and language uses. The analysis begins by critiquing the traditional Saussurean linguistic model, which prioritizes the study of language defined as the abstract system or a code over speech, its concrete manifestation, okay, which is the text according to Yuri Lotman. Saussure identifies them as these two basic difference that Saussure has identified as langue and parole. Langue is abstract, parole is concrete. So this particular model uses what we call the packaging metaphor. A text is treated as a disposable packaging for a message or content. That is, text is merely a kind of outer packaging, which is expressed in parole. Right? The primary goal of communication is for the receiver to decode the text and receive a message identical to the one sent. So, whatever the speaker is sending or sender of the message is sending, you as a receiver should interpret the message in the very same manner. The text itself holds no intrinsic value beyond being a vehicle for this content. Okay? So, in this sense, the primary critic of Lotman is uh, this idea that there is no intrinsic value of the text, there is no intrinsic value of the parole. It is just a vehicle that carries the message from one person to another. Second idea is the ideal of adequacy. The system is considered to work well if the received message is wholly identical to the dispatched one. Any differences are classified as errors to be prevented by mechanisms like redundancy. So, this is again a kind of uh, critic where Lotman suggests that if and only if the sent message and the received message are same, then and only then it is the right kind of exchange. If there is some differences in terms of reception and interpretation, then it will be considered error, okay, which basically a problematic aspect for the human communication. So this is what Lotman calls paradox of natural language. Human communication happens in natural language, and the kind of expectation of adequacy that we were expecting, okay, in this model is something uh, not correct as long as the human communication and natural language is concerned. If perfect, adequate transmission is the primary criterion for success, then natural languages must be considered inefficient, because then the what we call sameness of the masses becomes a rare thing. The sender would send one thing, receiver would interpret uh, it, plus receiver would probably add his or her experience, emotions, etc., etc. Okay, so that sameness of the masses is not really possible in natural languages. Achieving absolute identity between transmitted and received messages requires the addresser and addressee to have wholly identical codes, a condition that is practically unobtainable. Differences in linguistic experience, memory, cultural tradition, and individual perspective ensure that the identity of transmitted and received text is always relative. Artificial languages as the model. Basically, Saussure's idea of it is also known as talking heads model by it was proposed. This name was used by uh, a British linguist Roy Harris, and he also criticized Saussure's model on these grounds. So, to guarantee perfect adequacy, one would need an artificial simplified language used by artificially simplified communicators with limited memory and no cultural background. Well, such systems perfectly model the function of adequate transmission. They lose the other essential functions inherent to natural language, most notably its universalism. Then Lotman proposes this, that is generating new meanings or the creative function, that is the function of the text. In direct contrast to the transmission model, the Saussurian model we just talked about, the creative function posits that semiotic systems are also generators of new messages. So we need to understand what is a new message. A new message is not one produced by a simple symmetrical transformation where the original input can be perfectly recovered. It is like solving a math problem. Communication is not a mathematical problem. A new message arises from an asymmetrical transformation, where a reverse operation would not produce the original text but a third different text. I can give you a very simple example. Let's say in English, we say it is raining. If I translate this in Hindi, I would say बारिश हो रही है. Now, if I revert translate this Hindi sentence into English, it would be rain is happening. So this process of asymmetrical transformation is what identified as a kind of new message, that the codes are not so similar that and even the users of the code are not so similar that they will always produce and reproduce the same thing. So there is the difference in the what we call the kind of interpretations that we get. So translation as a creative act. So translation of artistic text is the primary example. The translation of a poem from one language to another is not a one-to-one transfer, and there can be many possibilities. You can just try translating something from, let's say, your mother tongue into some other language that you know well. And once it is translated, you reverse translate the translated text into your mother tongue. And you will see that the second translation would be very different from the original text. Okay. So, for example, translating a Japanese haiku into Gujarati may sometimes require a completely different poetic form, not a direct symmetrical transfer. The fact that multiple translations of the same poem can exist demonstrate that there is a space of possible interpretations rather than a single correct correspondence. So, continuing this creative function, the idea of accretion of meaning becomes important. In creative transformations, meaning is not just an invariant element that is preserved, it is also what is altered. This process results in an accretion of meaning. And this also means a kind of inseparability of language and content. In complex meaning generation, language is inseparable from the content it expresses. The message becomes not just a message in a language, but also a message about the language. Roman Jakobson termed this phenomena the set to the code, a fundamental feature of literary text specifically. Then condensing cultural memory, that is the second function, the memory function. Okay. The text third function is its capacity to act as a condenser of cultural memory. The text intrinsic memory, that is every text that we are reading or referring to, it will also have its own memory. A text is not a static object. It has the capacity to preserve the memory of its previous context. The sum of a context in which a text acquires interpretation can be termed the text memory. So this will include the accumulation of information. Instead of fading over time, texts that remain culturally active demonstrate a capacity to accumulate information. They gain new meanings through their interaction with new context and new audiences. For example, the novella, Bengali novella, Devadas, today is not just Sarat Babu's original Bengali work. It is also the memory of all his subsequent interpretations on stage and screen and its criticism. A modern audience cannot forget what has been learned since Sarat Babu's time, and this knowledge gives the text new layers of meaning. So those new layers are basically coming from the memory of the text. The spectrum of language, that is from artificial to artistic. The text proposes that all languages and text can be situated along an axis defined by two abstract poles. The artificial pole, that is the pole characterized by the primary function of transmitting invariant messages. That is the first level. And the artistic or poetic pole, the pole characterized by the dominance of the creative function. A movable position. These poles are theoretical abstraction. No actual language is purely one or the other. You can't just say that the language Gujarati or Hindi or English or French or any such language is only like artificial language, just communicating the messages without any what we call variation in terms of interpretation. or these are only artistic languages used only for creative purposes. These are abstractions. These are uh, theoretical abstraction. The same Gujarati language or English language that we use, it is used for the exchange of messages, and this language is also used for creative functions. Okay. No actual language is purely artificial or artistic. Natural languages contain poetic elements like synonymity, and even the most individualistic artistic languages must contain metalingual elements such as self reflection on the code. Furthermore, a text position on this axis is not fixed. It can be shifted by the perspective of the reader. A person has sent a very simple message, okay, probably very literal message, but the reader, the person who's receiving the message, might interpret that message as something creative, something metaphorical. So that depends on the perspective of the reader. All right, so that's all from my side. Please like, share, and comment, and we'll come back. We'll meet again with more such reviews of chapters, and we'll discuss some important concepts. Thank you.